Welcome back to Betting the Limit. I'm your host, Drew Shore. Today we're going to be joined by a good friend of mine who's a serial entrepreneur and is the co-founder and co-CEO of Splash Sports. He has been at the forefront of innovation in the sports and gaming industry, reshaping how fans interact with their favorite teams and leagues. Today we're going to dive into his journey, some of the challenges that he faces building in the space, and what's next for his company and him personally. Welcome to the podcast, Joel Milton.
Awesome. Thanks, Drew.
Dude, thanks for doing this.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
It's not like you have a company to run or young babies at home. I'm glad we could do this.
It's a slow time of year for us, early September. So,
we were just talking about NFL season kicked off this week. This is the busiest time of the year for you guys?
Definitely. Yeah, right up there. March Madness, also crazy, especially given just the short turnaround between Selection Sunday and when most, brackets and contests start. But yeah, football is king. The NFL is definitely the 100-pound gorilla in the room. I
just downloaded the app and now I'm playing in a survivor pool. I think I put in 2 entries, lost my first team. But how do people use it for March Madness?
Splash, we bought RunYourPool and OfficeFootballPool.com a couple years ago, and those sites had been around for 20 years and offered everything from traditional brackets to things like survivor pools. You can do survivor for March Madness. Now on Splash, we do real money survivor pools for March Madness. So similar to NFL, you can only pick one team each day of the tournament in the beginning or each round as it goes on, and you can't use the same team twice. So if you think Duke's going to win it all, you can't use them early on because otherwise you'll get to the finals with no one left to choose.
All right. Well, I'm 0 for 1 so far. We'll see how the rest of the season goes. But one of the reasons I enjoy spending time with you, because as I played sports my whole life, didn't hang out with a ton of really cool entrepreneurs in college and stuff like that. And this is not only the first company you built, but you had a lot of success prior to building Splash as well.
First of all, it's not normal for athletes to think that tech founders are cool. It's usually the other way around.
That's starting to shift.
Most of us, grew up watching people play sports on TV, and that's who we looked up to. I've spent now the bulk of my career in what I would call regulated industries. In 2014, I was a co-founder and CEO of a software company in the cannabis space. That's what brought me out to Colorado, and spent the better part of a decade building a B2B SaaS company in that industry and watching state by state start to legalize and dealing with regulatory challenges across state lines. And now we're seeing a lot of similarities in the gaming space.
I'm always interested, you grew up in New York, you said you were working for a ton of different startups. How did your original idea come about that this industry needed new software and you were going to do something about to fix it?
I was young, and so I had time and risk. In 2014, Colorado was the first state to legalize adult use cannabis. And someone actually told me about it. I wasn't really following it. It wasn't a national news story really at the time. And back then, marijuana was kind of a bad word. It was saying a real drug, right? It wasn't as destigmatized as it is now. And so I flew out to Denver and crashed on a couch with a friend and went to a bunch of these dispensaries. They all had long lines out the door. They were all run by people who are more from the drug industry than the business industry, and there weren't really tools available because it was federally illegal. Big software companies wouldn't sell their software there. It was cash only business, and it seemed like there was an opportunity to build software, and so that's sort of what we did.
What did the software do?
Well, at first the thesis was order ahead software because we had these really long lines out the door, and so we're like, all right, great, let's living in New York at the time, seamless web back in 2014 was the thing, and no one would ever wait in line. You would just order online from Seamless Web and swing by and grab it on your way home or get delivery. And so we're like, what if we just built the same thing for dispensaries? So we built this software to let customers order online who knew what they wanted. So a person who wanted to spend $200 who was a regular didn't have to wait online behind a tourist who had 100 questions and wanted to smell everything and then whatever else. And our pitch to the dispensaries was save your bud tenders, as they were called, who sort of worked the counters, the time, rather than spend 15 minutes with the tourist who's going to buy a $12 joint, prioritize your VIP customers who know what they want every week and are buying hundreds of dollars worth of product. It sounded great in theory. We built the whole ordering software system, but it turns out when you have bud tenders making approximately minimum wage with a line out the door, they are not going to fulfill the order that comes in through the computer. They are going to deal with the angry person who's standing in front of them who wants their turn next. So we ended up pivoting and actually focusing on the loyalty side because as a cash-only business, a lot of these dispensaries did not know who their customers were. They were spending a lot of money on customer acquisition, but nothing really on retention. And we helped them build a full loyalty CRM basically to understand who their customers were, what types of products they liked, how to market to them directly, let them know about sales and opportunities for their favorite products, reward them for coming back to their store as opposed to them shopping around more frequently, and then also incorporating e-commerce as well.
When you went to the first dispensary, you got your first yes, but then eventually, after a couple of years, you guys were in like 27 different states?
Yeah, as the market continued to grow, we grew with it. So that was definitely a lesson that I learned, which is if you're going to pick an industry, it's really nice to pick one that has a lot of tailwinds, so it makes it easier for you to grow. But yeah, by 2016, 2017, 1 out of every 3 dispensaries across the country was using our software. We did a good job of listening to our customers, and not just listening to what they tell us, but actually looking at what was happening, because customers will famously tell you they want one thing, but actually want something different. Built a good product that worked really well and helped our clients make money, and had a lot of fun and learned a lot along the way.
A lot of uber successful people always talk about, like, they ran their first company, there's so many things they did well. What are some things, looking back now as you've had so much more success, like from your early days as a CEO, that you think you could have learned from, or I could learn from, or young people could probably do differently?
It's funny, I guest lecture a class for called like the Lean Startup Method, which is a famous book at CU. And I talk a lot about that. My first company that I did before the cannabis space, we spent a lot of time, what you call in the lab, right? Building and trying to make the perfect product before we launched it. And then by the time we launched it, it was sort of too late, right? And the Lean Startup Method is the opposite of that. It's like, how do you build the MVP, the minimum viable product, not the Drew Shore of hockey, and get something out in the wild so you can test and iterate and change and look at the data that's coming in and continue to learn and grow, rather than spend all this time and money trying to build what you think is perfect before you launch it out to the world. And so I can help guest lecture that class quite well, because I lived through it, and I think at Baker and here at Splash, we've definitely taken a lot of those lessons and have been much better at getting things out into the wild and testing them and iterating, as opposed to trying to make perfect first.
I struggle with that a lot, because sometimes I feel like we're not moving fast enough, and then other times I look back and like so many mistakes we made were because we were moving so fast, and I think I've had a really hard time balancing that. It's a really hard balance, and I think anyone who can really figure it out will make a whole lot of money and maybe we'll write the next evolution of the book. But that's it. It's the same, it's like all things, right? It's a spectrum. It's no different than, on one hand, focus is really important, and you want to stay focused and execute. And if you don't have a North Star, you're going to get lost at sea. And the opposite of that is, shiny object syndrome, where every day you have a new idea that's different and you chase it, and you're constantly like trying to find the next great idea, but you never spend enough time on one of them to execute. And the reality is neither one of those is right, because if you just focus on the North Star and you put, horse blinders on, you're going to miss what the market's telling you and real opportunities. But if you're constantly chasing every shiny object, you're never going to move forward, because you're going to be running in circles after all these things. So like all things, it's a balance, and it's not one that you can sort of explain in a single sentence. I'm interested to know about the pivot from the marijuana business to what you're doing now. So you exit the marijuana business, then do you take some time off? Do you already have the idea to kind of run Splash? What was your transition period like? And I mean, I talk about it a lot, like the transition for athletes can be really tough. And the more business people that I talk to, it's like some people who exit a company feel just as lost as guys do when they stop playing sports. Yeah,
so we had bought one of our biggest competitors along the way, which was a really interesting experience, going through M&A and then the integration of that. And then after we sold the business, I was involved in corp dev and helped do a handful of other M&A acquisitions and help integrate those businesses. And I really liked the deal side, and so I was fascinated by M&A. When I was thinking about what I wanted to do next, I was all over the place, right? I thought about venture capital, I thought about private equity, buying and selling businesses. I explored this concept called like a search fund, where you basically have a thesis for a specific market, and a lot of people will actually like raise money to then go buy a business and then grow it. And typically those are, think of like a business run by a boomer that is, retiring, that's cash flowing, but it's, not fully up to the 21st century and can be improved on. Someone says, hey, my thesis is there's all these, janitorial service companies in the Pacific Northwest that are, undervalued, and if we rolled them up and consolidated services, it's like mini private equity.
Yeah.
And it's, got popularized out of GSB and Stanford Business School, and younger kids, usually out of college, out of grad school, will have this thesis. They'll raise money so they can pay themselves a salary while they run a search that meets the criteria, and then they'll go buy, one or several of these businesses and grow them. And so that was really interesting to me. So I was all over the place, talked to a whole bunch of people, and then one day, a buddy of mine who actually had introduced me to the concept of a golf one and done, which is a golf pool format that I've been playing in now. That's a lot of fun. Told me, he's like, what if we just bought officefootballpool.com? And Office Football Pool was started over 20 years ago, and that was the site we used for this golf pool. But like CBS or ESPN, it just kept score, right? None of the money was actually held there. But it's this website that we used and everyone else used to sort of, play these fantasy games, these pool games, March Madness brackets, golf one and done pools, NFL Survivor pools. And I still have the text. I immediately wrote back. I was like, yeah, we probably need to raise X amount of dollars, but I'm in, let's do it. And like, that was the first time I had like conviction of like, okay, I think this checks a lot of boxes and this makes sense for the next step.
So you buy the website, and then what happened from there?
Wow, we definitely did not buy the website next. First, we had the idea. Then it took almost a full year to actually get anything done. So we looked at officefootballpool.com, but we also wanted to evaluate the market and see what other sites out there met these criteria. We talked to everyone on the first several pages of Google for NFL Survivor Pool, Pick'em Pool, Golf One and Done, etc., and set up a website called Certiman Ventures. Certiman was Latin for competition, and so we emailed all these people and said, hey, we're deploying capital in the space, we'd love to talk, and made it seem like we were some VC private equity group or whatever it was, and talked to all these guys and understood how many customers did they have, what was their retention and churn like, what was their business model, and we realized a couple of them charged money where others were free. And our thesis was the ones that charge money, those users are probably betting on sports or care more about sports if they're willing to pay for this, right? If you're just playing with a couple buddies for bragging rights, you'll use a free site, not one that actually charges money. And so we gravitated towards those for that reason. And at the time, this is 2020, 2021, the big sportsbook companies, this was like the height of their marketing, and they were spending upwards of $500 to $1,000 to acquire a single user. We're like, well, if we can buy a website that has hundreds of thousands of users and we believe they're sports bettors, there's a nice arbitrage there if we can buy it on an EBITDA multiple, but value it on a user multiple. And so, yeah, we sort of picked our favorite or favorites in the category, started to negotiate, try to get them under an LOI. We had to run, our own diligence on them. We had to do quality of earnings and make sure that, the revenue was what they said it was. And then we actually had to make sure we could, raise the capital to buy the business.
The business was being run, you said, for 20 years. I assume it's just by like some people who had no real desire to take it any further. They were just happy doing what they were doing.
It's funny, both businesses, both Run Your Pool and Office Football Pool, were remarkably similar. Both were started by a single guy, in the late 90s or early 2000s, who was doing this either by hand or via fax, and had some software engineering background, and his friends were like, hey, let's do this. And so they just built it to solve their own needs, and it continued to grow. Both of them ended up hiring somebody else that they knew. Some of them along the way had added more or less, but basically they were still being run by two people. And they were like really great businesses that evolved over 2 decades by listening to their customers and building what they wanted, and amassed a really sizable and sticky group of customers. And that was one of our challenges when we looked at the pool space and we said, hey, this is like an awesome sector. Part of the reason we didn't just start from scratch is it would have been really hard to get people to move over, right? Guys use the same site year over year, right? If you're on ESPN for your fantasy league, you're not going to just change every year, right? You got 12 other guys in your fantasy league, you're not going to change. Or if you're in a Survivor pool with 1,000 people, you're not going to move all 1,000 people from one site to another. And so,
yeah, I think my buddies have been on Yahoo Sports for 15 years now.
Yeah, and so it's really a sticky industry. And so, if we wanted to go after it, we realized that really the only way to do so was through M&A.
During the M&A process, like you had never had any experience with that. Is that something that you look back on that you think like, oh, I should have done something differently, or are you pretty happy with how that process went?
We had done some in the prior world, so definitely learned some lessons the hard way. But
because you always hear kids now, like the new hot thing for like, I feel like younger kids now is like, oh, I'm just gonna, like you said, go buy a bunch of HVAC companies, roll them up, and next thing you know, I'm gonna have $1 billion a year.
Yeah, we were pretty focused with our thesis. We really knew who we wanted to go after. The challenge was, they weren't necessarily dying to sell, for example, right? Like the number of people afterwards, 3 years later when we finally announced who we were and what we did, the number of people who were like, oh, like I wanted to buy Office Football Pool, or I tried to buy that company. It's a lot. I've heard that now from, a dozen different people.
So how were you able to get it done? And all these, because I've heard the same thing actually. We have some mutual friends who I know tried to buy it, and obviously weren't as successful as you in it.
Like all things, a little bit of luck, the right timing, and persistence. I had the time and the bandwidth to go after it. I think we sold them a good story of where we wanted to take their business. Right, we weren't trying to just shut it down, but a lot of them had thought about the ability to touch real money and turn this into a licensed gaming company, or do more with it. Or it's really hard running a 2-person company when you're doing everything from customer support to bookkeeping and taxes and whatever else, to also building the software and everything. And so being able to help take some of that off of the plate was really the pitch that I think we went after, and maybe had an advantage over a larger company that maybe would have seemed more threatening.
You might not be able to answer this, but is there any chance those original owners of the site were able to roll any of that purchase into what Splash is today?
Yeah, so we did structure it so that a portion of it was rollover.
Cool.
So that we wanted everyone to be aligned and swim upstream. And actually, in both companies, one of the two people are still involved with the business. So
that's awesome. So
yeah.
let's talk about. We actually have a friend who I was texting earlier this, who now works for you as well, a former DU hockey guy. So I love you hiring the DU hockey guys. But talk about the current state of the business now. How many employees do we have? What are we doing? What are some of the new features that we're launching?
Yeah. So our thesis all along was to take these games that people were playing and figure out how to do them legally for real money, right? So instead of a commissioner running a NFL Survivor contest and collecting Venmos from his friends and whatever else, what if we acted as the bank? What if we said, hey, this is a legal game of skill, or a daily fantasy contest, and we are going to operate it. And the commissioner will act as the user acquisition channel for us, right? They'll still invite everyone to their contest. So in a way, it's like a B2B2C product where our customer is the commissioner who runs these games, and then they invite their users and we help hold on to all the money, make it safe, make it legal, and allow them to do more. Because one of the pain points we heard from commissioners was, especially the big ones, if you're running a pool with 1,000 people in it, it's really hard to keep track of all of it. And
it's a lot of money to chase
down who's paying and who's not. Now, obviously, Run Your Pool and Office Football Pool were very clearly for entertainment purposes only, as it's stated on the website. And so those games were not supposed to be real money games on the site. There was just a site for running entertainment games, which is our party line there. But on Splash, we want to let those people run these games for real money. And so now we can say, hey, you can run these games for real money and you can do more of them, because once people already have a wallet connected and are on the platform, you can run a revival pool week 4 because guys are already knocked out, right?
Because Drew Shore's knocked out, yeah.
You can do March Madness, which you never did before because you didn't care that much. You can do college bowl games. You can do, golf. And so our whole thesis is that it's more fun to play with your friends, right? And no disrespect to sportsbooks out there, they provide an amazing product, but there's something really exciting about being in this group of people that and you're competing against them, and the camaraderie that comes from that, and the chatter on the message board or on the side text threads, it's like being part of a team versus just you against the house on a traditional bet. And so we really love fostering that community, and that's what we're focused on at Splash, is building and enabling these communities of people to play against each other, whether it's members of Amalfi competing against each other for a chance to go play Shadow Creek, or whether it's people who all listen to Rick Rungood and listen to his YouTube show who want to play against each other in a golf league against each other, or guys who have all been friends and have just been part of the same league for 15 years, going back to the early days of Run Your Pool, giving them the platform to sort of come together each week. And so that's been our focus.
Yeah, I didn't know, last week when my buddy called me, who then, thank you for taking the time to talk to him, he's ran a football pool forever. He didn't realize too that if he brings all his guys over, you guys even split some of the revenue with the commissioners.
100%, yeah, it's sort of the content creator model, right? So YouTube doesn't really make videos, right? They get guys like you to make videos, and then depending on how many views you get, they share the ad revenue with you. And then the rest of it they get to keep, and that's how they make money, right? And so, whether it's a person with 10 followers or Mr. Beast, the business model is anyone can create the content and you will share in the upside with it. And that's really how we focus as well. And so any commissioner who wants to run a game, whether they were doing it previously or not, if you want to run a game on our platform, like we'll pay you to do so, right? Like we'll take a rake out of the contest and we'll cover our payment processing fees and costs of being a legal operating site, and we'll share that revenue with you. And that's really been our unique business model, and it's a little different than being a true B2C company where you're advertising on billboards and TV commercials going after 1 million people one at a time. We're going after 1,000 commissioners, each of whom brings in 1,000 people, and that's how we get to the million.
I was laughing thinking about the message board. We have a friend who is huge in the football betting space, Adam Levitan, who week one of the Amalfi contest, I think he went 0 for 5 or 1 for 5. And I just had so much pleasure taking a screenshot of that, sending it, and like calling him the industry expert.
100%. And it's, a tale as old as time. And, whether it's Rick, who's a great partner of ours, he says his, DMs on Twitter are constantly of people, talking trash if they pass him on the leaderboard because, he's the expert. He has, rickrungood.com, or he's, advanced golf analytics and whatever else. But it's cool. It's no different than, if you're home alone on taking a Peloton class in your basement, you get a shout out from Emma Lovewell on your 1,000th ride, right? All of a sudden it feels like you're connected to this community as opposed to just you by yourself doing an exercise class, right? Or high fives from other people also in the same class as you. And so that's sort of the experience that we have and have brought to the table. And it's been really interesting to see other groups gravitate towards it. ESPN New York Radio did a survivor pool for people who would listen in, right? Now the hosts can talk about that. Cover 3, the college football podcast on CBS is running one, and they got thousands and thousands of people to all join because they all want to, see if they can beat the experts the same way, you were happy to see if you could beat Levitan. And so it's fun. It's a way to engage with the community. If you're a content creator, instead of you talking into a camera, one directional, now it's bi-directional, right? Because your audience can listen and not just listen, but compete against you and be in that game with you. That goes both ways.
Yeah, when I was on the site the other day, you guys have some really cool content creators, athletes running all different types of pools. Who's probably not necessarily your most successful, but who has the most engagement from that sector in terms of traffic and banter and people joining their contest?
Yeah, it's been fun to see. It's not always who you think it is, right? So number of followers on Instagram doesn't necessarily correlate to who's going to fill the best contest. It's really, you see where the real engagement comes from, and also which people really lean into it, right? Who's going to just throw it up there and hope it works versus who's going to really say hey, I'm running a Survivor game, come play against me, see if you can beat me, and call out that personal challenge to their fans. And it's been really fun to see. We've worked with everyone from handicapping personalities in the more traditional betting space to ex-athletes to media personalities to poker guys, and all of them have had various degrees of success depending on who they are. But yeah, there's not one obvious common thread that's this person will be successful or not. It really depends on their ability to lean in.
I've never been able to do it because I was obviously a player then agent. But do you guys do anything in the hockey? Because I know, people like to play fantasy hockey. Is that something we could ever launch?
We're working on some hockey stuff, yeah.
Okay.
Stay tuned.
Cool. I'm interested to know, you mentioned the people who will pay for the site are often sports bettors. Obviously, everyone knows sports betting's gone insane. Yeah. Do you look at that as direct competition, or is it you guys almost help each other? Because if someone will bet on a Broncos game, they're typically in a survivor pool or fantasy pool with their friends.
Yeah, I think if we, even pre-PASPA repeal, pre-real sports betting, you look at the early days of DraftKings and FanDuel, and a lot of them really started peer-to-peer, right? You were playing in the Millie Maker contest on daily fantasy, or private groups on FanDuel where it's you versus your friends in daily fantasy. And so I think this industry has been peer-to-peer for a long time. And you think of the origins of survivors and March Madness brackets at your college or your friends, people want to play against each other. Obviously with the PASPA repeal, the big guys, DraftKings and FanDuel, ran really fast and did a great job of cornering the legal sports betting market and the online sports betting market. But we think that that's left a little bit of a vacancy in the peer-to-peer space, and that's really where we're trying to step into. And so I don't think it's directly competitive. And obviously anything that's competing for wallet share is somewhat indirectly competitive. And some of those guys do offer survivor products or things that are a little bit similar, but I think we're uniquely focused on the true community experience that we were talking about before in ways that others aren't. And that's our little corner of the market, and we're happy to stay focused on it. And yeah.
I feel like every time I turn on CNBC now, like there's either DraftKings launched in this state or got in trouble in this state, or like the legalization around so much of this stuff seems so gray and just changing so much. How hard has it been building in this business when legalization and stuff has changed so rapidly?
It's not too dissimilar from the cannabis industry, which is sort of part of the reason I got into it, right? The thesis is if you get into a market that has, let's say, 5 states and you think it's going to go to 30, that's pretty good growth, right? Like, especially if you can get in early and maintain some market share, it's much easier to grow in an industry that is growing quickly than it is to try to build a product in a company that's, already sort of reached its complete saturation. So yeah, it's one of our early hires was in-house legal, right? Because we needed to focus on that. We work with multiple law firms externally too, and same way in the cannabis spaces. We spend a lot of time and money working with lobbyists, legislators, in-house counsel, external counsel. So it's just one of the challenges, but in a way, it creates a little bit of a hurdle for new entrants into the space who maybe aren't comfortable with legislative risk or aren't comfortable with an industry that is under so much scrutiny. And so that's part of the reason I enjoy it.
I know people talk a lot about, is the term like some games they called skill games versus gambling, or game of chance, game of skill. Are you guys able to now operate in pretty much every state without much trouble?
So we don't offer any gambling. We don't offer any betting. We offer only games of skill or traditional like fantasy, daily fantasy games. And what that means is, again, games like Survivor that are season long with multiple picks from multiple teams where there's a true element of skill, we can offer. Games like Super Bowl squares, we can't. That's bingo, right? There is no way to say that there's skill in there. And so, we've spent a lot of time and money figuring out which of these games we can run for real money and in which states. Because everything we do is peer-to-peer, that also is helpful. That was sort of one of the other challenges we've seen with companies like, Underdog and Prize Picks. As they were growing, they had an against the house model in the player prop style fantasy space. And recently Prize Picks changed to just be entirely peer-to-peer, right? Because big states like Florida and others said, you can't run these games against the house. So early on, we made the decision to be entirely peer-to-peer, so we don't take any bets directly against the house. That's been helpful from a legislative standpoint. But yeah, there's always a risk, right? The California, AG the other day came out and said all fantasy should be illegal. And, even Gavin Newsom didn't agree. Obviously, DraftKings and FanDuel didn't agree. All the coalition members, Prize Picks, Underdog, no one agreed. But yeah, anyone can wake up at any moment and sort of, make a declarative statement about what they think, and that will cause a reaction.
Can you explain to me what's happening with all of these prediction markets? I mean, I feel like that's another thing that it seems like every time you read somewhere, a new prediction market's launched, there's obviously some gray legalization there, but what is going on with prediction markets? And for people who might have no idea what I'm talking about, like just explain kind of everything A to Z to them.
Yeah, so a couple years ago, actually really got into the public spotlight around the election. You could sort of like bet on who was going to be president, who's going to win the presidential election. And the big sites were Polymarket, which was not in the U.S. at the time, and Kalshi. And the way these sites operate is not by taking bets themselves, but actually under the regulation of the CFTC, the Commodities Futures Trade Commission, which is basically the same guys that sort of regulate any futures, right? So, you want barrel of oil, right? Like you're not buying or taking a bet against it from the house. You're like, it's a market, right? Just like the stock market, but it's a futures, commodity futures market where you're sort of betting on where this speculation of this product will be, and you can buy and sell contracts on it. And so they brought that concept to the presidential election. Say, all right, I think Donald Trump's going to win, or Biden was going to win, and then Harris will flip in, and now they've since started offering sports contracts, and because it's governed by the CFTC, which is federal, it sort of potentially supersedes state laws around gambling because they'll say it's not gambling, even though their ads say sports betting is now legal in 50 states, like sort of playing into the fact that you can effectively bet or buy a contract on the winner of the game. But yeah, it's really interesting to see. And I think, there's been a flurry of lawsuits already. Maryland and other states have said, hey, this is sports betting, we need, issue a cease and desist or need to change this. But we've seen a lot of big guys get into the space. Underdog just announced a partnership with Crypto.com, and they're going to start offering these. We've seen DraftKings and FanDuel talking off and on about whether or not they're going to register as a DCM, a designated contract maker, so they can actually offer these contracts themselves. So yeah, that's a perfect example of the market changing really, really quickly in a really short period of time.
I think one of the craziest things I've seen about those is on some current events, it seems like some of those prediction markets are almost like our most accurate form of news.
That is it is interesting. Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of articles around that, but at the same time, every now and then, one of the big favorites changes, right? And then the argument is, even if something's a 98% chance to happen, it's not settled until it's settled, right? Like the door's still open, and so. Yeah, it's really interesting to see, sort of court of public opinion and how good they are at, predictions versus a 538, right? Or these polling companies out there for something like the presidential election.
Yeah, this presidential election, I knew some friends who had contracts on there, and I mean, this one was over very quickly after, but it would have been very interesting to see how it was handled, had it like dragged on for like months.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of them will say, the details on when and how it specifically settles easier for a sporting event, for example. But yeah.
I played hockey in Europe for a while, so obviously know how big and how passionate Europeans are for soccer. Are you guys anywhere outside of the US right now? And if you're not, any like plans to eventually expand into some of those other markets?
We are in Canada, and on the sort of free-to-play entertainment-only side, we do have users around the world. But on the real money side, we're just in the US and Canada right now. We are looking at some expansion. We do have a World Cup is coming up next year, which will be really popular, both domestic and abroad. And so thinking about ways to bring that more nationally. But yeah, we have a really big and popular World Cup product, which will be fun when that comes to North America.
Random side note, one of the hardest things for me since playing sports is like figuring out like the hiring process of people, and then unfortunately the firing process of people. You hear a lot of people say like hire fast, fire fast. What do you think of that? Like, you obviously have a huge company now, and I don't know if you do a lot of the hiring directly, but you obviously have a say in a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, I believe it's hire slow, fire fast. Okay. And yeah, I mean, the argument there is do a really thorough search, right? Make sure you get the right guy, take your time to do it, but then stick to your guns, and if it's not the right fit, move on and don't overthink it. And there's exceptions to every rule, but I think by and large it's true. I think there's very few times where I've really regret parting ways with somebody, right? Once it's very hard to change. It's probably sort of like a relationship, right? Like at some point you sort of know it's over, but maybe then you don't want to wait and do it, and you just sort of stick around a little too long, and then when you finally do, you're like, okay, that was the right move. Like,
yeah, now that you say that, like I've hired so many people that haven't exactly worked out, but then when you let them go, I've never really regretted that process.
Yeah, I think once you know. But hiring's, it's the most important thing, right? Your company is as good as the people that you have. We've been fortunate to get some really great people on board, many of whom have been with us for a long time. Obviously, there's been some missteps along the way, and likewise, there's also been really great people that have left because they got a better opportunity or something that was more right for their family. And the good news is that no matter how key an employee is, everyone's replaceable. I'm replaceable, right? And so you can't lose too much sleep over losing somebody, especially once someone's made up their mind, right? If you sort of give them a counter offer to stay, at that point they're already one foot out the door. And so that's the other advice would be, once someone says they're leaving or got another job, like unless you really, really need them right now, going back and giving them a counter offer and trying to get them to stay, I think you're only prolonging the inevitable.
A common trait among really young, successful CEOs is a lot of them have a ton of mentors. Do you have a small group of friends who are super successful, or some older people that when you're making some of these big decisions, whether it's to buy a website or whatever you're doing, that you run this through, or are you kind of a guy who goes off your gut and lets it roll?
I have a great network of people that I talk to, and have been building that network for quite some time. So yeah, I love getting a lot of opinions, and then sort of forming your own based on everything you learn. But I'm fortunate to have a really great group of friends and business contacts. I've always had a co-founder as well, which is really nice. So you're not kind of going it alone, someone you can bounce ideas off of and work with. And then some of the people involved in my last company are still now investors and involved in this company. And so it's great to maintain those relationships and continue to have use them as a sounding board to bounce ideas off of. But I think you absolutely need a network. It takes a village.
From a co-founder perspective, you think it's better to have someone who's similar to you or completely opposite?
Yes. Arguments for both. I think I don't think you want to be so dissimilar that you'll never find common ground. But if you're identical with one another, I don't know that you get the full benefit, right? It's important to have sort of the person who's comfortable playing devil's advocate or who sees things a little bit differently so you can bounce ideas off of each other. But you do need to be directionally aligned about how you think about the world and the business. Otherwise, you're never gonna, get on the same page to execute. So finding that sort of, again, middle ground between the two extremes.
What's the biggest challenge for the business today?
That's a good question. I think, right now we have these two brands that have been around for a very long time that have very loyal and passionate customers. And we can't continue to run three brands forever, right? It's three different websites, three different, products to market and everything else. And so we are trying to figure out how to integrate and consolidate them. But anytime you have change, customers get upset, right? Whether it's right or wrong. And as we're making these changes, there are hurdles that we're sort of creating, which cause frustrations, which are unfortunate. There's also changes that are probably a net benefit to our users, but they still don't always see it that way in the moment, right? But it's no different when Facebook first invented the wall. Like people got upset about that, right? When LinkedIn had their newsfeed, people got upset about that. These are sort of common core features now that are the cornerstones of products. But anytime there's change that's different from how people originally perceive something, the reaction is usually negative. And so anytime a big company does an overhaul or a redesign, changes the logo of their Cracker Barrel, but there's the public doesn't really respond well to change. And so I think that's definitely our biggest challenge right now.
Yeah, I think that's interesting on the sports betting sites because I've heard a lot of people say our product is better now. But then you see a lot of people just stick with what they know, even just because DraftKings might change their layout feature. I don't know how many customers that's actually converting who have been loyal FanDuel people or vice versa for years.
Yeah, people are sticky. People don't like change. That's always been the case in tech, and I think to the best of your ability, if you could sort of give them the opportunity to make the change on their own or sort of get there, it's always better than forcing it on them, but you don't always have that luxury. I remember in my last company when we sort of had to do our first big overhaul of the 1.0 to the 2.0, we ended up slow rolling the new version and said, hey, we're still gonna keep your new one. You can keep using 1.0 for now. It's not changing, it's not going anywhere. But here's a free look at the new version and all these better features and functionalities. We're just gonna give it to you and you can play around with it over time. And eventually we sent out notes that said, all right, we might be starting to deprecate 1.0 and you're gonna have to move over. But sort of giving those people that opportunity versus all of a sudden saying, hey, you're now moved over, and then just dealing with outcry and revolt makes it a little bit easier.
The capabilities of AI are really just kind of taking over different industries differently. How are you guys thinking about that in terms of Splash? How much are you using it? Where are you using it? And kind of where do you see that going within your specific company?
Yeah, you have to, right? I mean, the conversation we had with our company was AI is not going to take your job, but if you don't learn how to use it, someone who knows how to use AI is going to take your job, right? Because it's not always a body replacement, but it's a 10x function for an individual. And so our engineering team, is actively deploying it to write code more quickly and more efficiently and review it and get through QA. Our marketing team uses it to crank out materials and create content and run more targeted campaigns. The product team can use it to design more efficiently and faster. Our customer support team, over half of our tickets are now solved by AI, right? And it doesn't happen magically. You spend a lot of time teaching it how to respond to different queries and giving it the right information and continuing to hone it, but it'll work at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday, right? Whereas, we don't necessarily always have a body who's online at that hour. Myself, I use it to, whether it's writing, internal company-wide updates and helping me polish that or, get through my, day-to-day tasks more efficiently. So, we're definitely not an AI company the way, plenty of businesses out there that are actually building an AI business, but it is part of our annual performance review now is how well is this person leveraging AI to execute their job function. And that's actually something we sort of, measure against on your annual performance now.
You have so many smart friends. What's the coolest thing one of your friends is doing in the AI space, whether it's a company he's building or you, found out that's how he takes his dog for a walk or, you know what I mean? Not literally, but what's something that you've heard from one of your buddies that is one of the cooler things that they're using it for?
I'll give a plug to a company that's local called Magic School, which has built some really cool AI software tools for teachers, really helping them remove a lot of the things that are super time consuming around lesson planning and creating better experiences for teachers, and they're absolutely on fire. And it was started by a former teacher. And
are you an
really
investor?
Cool. I am, yeah.
There we go.
But on a more personal front, someone, I forgot where I heard it, told me that they started using voice ChatGPT to do trivia with their children so that they could buy time when they had work to do at the end of the day, but it was better than watching TV. And I actually tried it, and it's amazing. You give it a prompt, it's like, all right, my son is 3, he likes trucks, and we're learning about colors and, what letters sound like what. Can you please ask him questions? And it'll just start firing off questions, and the kids can talk to it. And it is this, interactive way to pass the time that is, probably a little bit better than just sitting there watching a TV show. So
I want to talk about personal finances a little bit. As someone who's been in an entrepreneurial startup, are you a guy that takes a lot of personal capital and is willing to write checks to your friends, to founders you think are smart, or do you like to keep a lot of that in what we'd call more traditional stocks, ETFs?
I have done a decent amount of angel investing. I don't know that I'm great at it. I think the problem that a lot of founders, that I've heard from other founders too, is we want to believe in the founder. I get excited.
You have a personal belief.
I get
this guy will figure it out.
They tell me their story, and I'm like, yeah, I like that. I'm in. Oh, I have some ideas. Have you thought about this? I believe in all of them. And so on the personal investing front, I've sort of dialed that down a little bit. I'm an LP in a local VC firm who are professional investors who are hopefully a little more disciplined than I am, but it's a way to stay close.
But the 2.0 version of you, who I'm sure pitches you twice a week, you've probably drawn back on it a little bit.
Yeah. Being an LP is a great way to stay close to the startup community without having to go do all the diligence and write the checks yourself. But I'm also happy to, always be, especially if it's someone I know, right? Be an informal advisor or get involved and help them with their business. Or, once a year, talk to kids at CU and talk about, the lean startup method and the lessons that I've learned the hard way. And, a lot of those kids end up asking, questions about their own business that they want to start. And so another way to sort of stay involved.
Were you one of those guys who was starting businesses or trying to start businesses when you were 15 or 16?
I don't think so. Not in the way that plenty of others were. Always close to it. Always, had I want to say a scheme. That sounds nefarious, but
had ideas.
Yeah, I think so.
All right. What is in the next 5 or 10 years? I know you have professional goals, personal goals. What would the ultimate success look like for you over the next 10 years?
Ultimate success is a balance of work and family, right? 2 young children, you know what that's like. Making sure I can sort of spend time there. Professionally, we're building something special here, and I want to make sure we see it to a good outcome, whatever that outcome looks like, and continue to be the home for these peer-to-peer games, continue to scale what we're doing and help anyone who wants to do community engagement, whether it's a podcaster or a YouTuber or a professional sports team who wants to do things with their fans, or a community of, friends or alumni or whomever else play these games against each other.
I just thought, couldn't a professional sports team, couldn't the Denver Broncos do one for all their fans and then have some crazy fan experience prize?
It's a great idea. Anyone listening, come find me.
No, I just think it would be great. I mean, think of every Broncos season ticket holder. Then they got I don't know. You see Patrick Mahomes had those guys out to his ranch and they were throwing footballs too. I don't know. I think that would be sweet.
Yeah, we think there's a huge opportunity there. We've done some stuff with brands before. We had Jack Link's Beef Jerky sponsor a big March Madness, game that we did. It was free to enter, but you get 100 million impressions of people checking their bracket 50 times a day, and they're staring at, the Sasquatch logo and a chance to win free beef jerky for a year, right? And as you're sitting on your couch watching college basketball, you're probably snacking. We did something with TaylorMade where we ran a free-to-play game for the Masters. And again, you're thinking about winning a brand new set of P700 irons from TaylorMade and, making your picks on who's going to win. And then, at the end, you get an email for 20% off and free shipping, and you're more likely to buy something. So I do think there's something really authentic about community engagement at the brand level, at the team level, at the community level, at the content level, and that's really where we like to spend our time.
Something I've struggled with as I've started my entrepreneurial journey is I always feel like I should be somewhere else. You know what I mean? I feel like when you're working all the time, you feel like you kind of have this dad guilt, you should be home more. And then when you're at home more, you're like, well, my business is not thriving maybe as quickly as I would like it to because I'm at home, not working on things I'm supposed to be working on. What would your advice to me be there?
I don't have any. One of my, going back to sort of advisors or mentors, a guy, Mike Lazaro, who started a company called Buddy Media that he sold to Salesforce for a big chunk of dough, and who's been an investor in our last company and our current one. He said he wrote a book recently called Shoveling Shit, and it was a story about him and his wife, falling in love and running companies together. He always said he made the conscious decision to prioritize work first while his kids were young so that he could spend time with them later, right? And if that works out, that's great, right? I think the challenge is if you do that and it doesn't work out, then you have neither, right? You have no time or relationship with your children, and now you still, don't have the money to just retire and spend with them. So I think like all things, it's a balance. I think, running a company is really hard. Starting business is really hard. You sort of have to make sacrifices to do it. Now that doesn't mean, don't see your children at all for 365 days a year. But you probably do have to work more than a normal person, and that's tough and it's a challenge. But that's sort of the decision that we've made.
I do feel like it is easier though if you like what you're doing. You know what I mean? Like most of the people who founded the business, generally care about the success of the business and enjoy it. And it's like people talk about like, how can X, Y, and Z spend 100 hours a week at the office? It's because they love it and actually believe in it.
Yeah, listen, it's fun, right? Like I like sports. I work in the sports space, right? I get to talk to people who are ex-athletes or team owners or people who are professional sports bettors. And it's fun, right? Those are the people I spend time with. I'm building products for people who want to play the same games that I like playing and that I've been playing forever, right? Like I was in a survivor pool with my dad when I was like 8 years old, right? That's like one of my earliest sports memories.
That's when it started.
It's like, like I remember like looking at the newspaper because the internet wasn't a thing, and like we'd look at the matchups and say, all right, here's who we're gonna pick this week, and like, call in the pick. And
does
so
your dad play on Splash?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
So, it's fun. It's fun to be in those things. It's fun when your work events are taking you to, the Masters or the NBA All-Star game or whatever else, right? Like that's fun. And you're right, it does make it easier to spend time in this space.
Dude, well, thanks for doing this.
Yeah.
Appreciate you and all the help you give me and everything anyways. And anything I can do to help you, let me know.
Amazing. I appreciate it. Thanks, Drew.
And bring your pool to Splash. Thanks, dude. Appreciate you doing that.
Yeah, thank you.